Welcome to this online lesson on Joseph Smith, Brigham Young and the Mormon Migration. The aims are to know who the Mormons were and why they migrated, to explain why their migration was so challenging, and to evaluate how successful the Mormon migration was. Your keyword starters then. Persecution, where a group is treated badly, often for being different, such as being a different race or religion. Your tasks. Firstly, define the word persecution. Then explain how persecution is a push factor for migrants. If you've not looked at push and pull factors before, then, well, maybe take a geography course first of all, but also my lesson on the Oregon Trail has got some details about that. And then thirdly, are there any groups today who are persecuted and may migrate? So pause the video here and consider the answer to those questions. When you're ready, press play and we'll move on. Alright, hopefully you've noted down the meaning of the word persecution, but that's a push factor because if someone is being persecuted or treated badly in one place, they might choose to move and go somewhere else. Are there any groups who are persecuted today and migrate? Well, yes, there absolutely are. I could give some specific examples, but when we hear the term asylum seekers, for example, these are people who are being persecuted or who have their lives in danger in their country of origin and decide that that is a push factor that will make them migrate elsewhere to seek asylum or safety. So there's a good modern example. Anyone who might claim to be an asylum seeker has probably been persecuted and therefore migrated. All right, let's have a look at some other factors. So who were the Mormons? The Mormons were a religious group that believed in a new form of Christianity. They believed that their founder, Joseph Smith, had discovered golden plates in the USA and that once translated, these changed Christian traditions dramatically. Other Christians persecuted them, particularly because of the Mormon belief in polygamy. This is where a man could marry more than one wife. They were forced to move from state to state, but met opposition from other Christians everywhere they went. In 1845, the Mormons were ordered to leave Illinois after rioters murdered Joseph Smith. Their new leader, Brigham Young, believed that God had called on the Mormons to take to the Oregon Trail and move to the Salt Lake Valley. The Salt Lake Valley was a hostile environment where no one else wanted to live, and this was outside of US territory, so Young believed that Mormons would be left in peace there. In fact, he said if there was a place on earth that no one else wanted to live, that's the place I'm looking for. They migrated between 1846 and 1847. So that's a really brief introduction to the Mormons, and you'll be able to look at this in more detail later on. So your task. Summarise the beliefs of the Mormons under the headings who, as in who were they and who were their leaders, what did they believe, where did they go, and when were the key events. There's more than just the migration to note down there. And then why did other Christians persecute them? That will provide you with a very brief revision summary of who the Mormons were, but you will need to know them in more detail than that. So pause the video now while you create your introductory notes. Okay, so who? Well, the Mormons are a group of people who believe in a new form of Christianity. They're originally led by Joseph Smith and then later by Brigham Young. What? Well, what did they believe? They believed in this idea of golden plates in the USA that once translated changed Christian beliefs, and they believed in this idea of polygamy. So where did they go? Well, they first of all went to Illinois, and then they were pushed out of Illinois and ended up at Salt Lake Valley. When? Well, the key events are that in 1845 they left Illinois after the murder of Joseph Smith, and they made their migration between 1846 and 47. So why did the other Christians persecute them? Well, they disagreed with these new traditions, and they particularly disagreed with this belief in polygamy, having more than one wife. All right, let's move on. Let's consider this source, which represents an example of anti-Mormon persecution. The source is called The Elder's Happy Home, clearly an ironic title. This is an anti-Mormon cartoon published in an American magazine in 1881. Look closely at the source. So here's your first task. Do a quick content, own knowledge and purpose analysis. First of all, in the content section, describe what the source says and shows. In the own knowledge section, link what it shows to something that you know about the Mormons. And then for the purpose, explain why the source was made, written or published. Pause the video now while you do that quick analysis. Okay, so in terms of content, we can see various women of various ages as well fighting each other. We can also see babies in front, presumably those are the babies of the children. However, what they've done is they've included an extra layer of scandal here. You might notice, for example, that one of the babies is black. That is suggesting that one of these women has been unfaithful with a black man and has even got edges of racism to it, as well as the overall theme of religious persecution. Nice source, eh? I don't think. Anyway, what else can you see on there? The elder is the man who's at the top. He's presumably the husband of all these wives, and they've got a kind of comically exaggerated large bed that they supposedly all sleep in. So, adding that to our own knowledge, we can see that the source shows a man hiding from his many wives who are arguing and many children cry in a cot. And this is linked to our own knowledge that Christians hated the idea of polygamy. Then the purpose, the source was likely published to ridicule Mormons, particularly by Christians who didn't like them. Some follow-up tasks now. What parts of the source seem to be particularly exaggerated? Explain your choices. Why do you think this source was made? What point is it trying to make? And thirdly, the cartoon is meant to be funny. Does this make it a worse or less bad act of persecution against the Mormon people? Explain your point of view. Alright, pause the video again, and then we'll continue with some answers after you're ready. So, the parts of the source that might seem exaggerated relate to the number of children, especially the inclusion of the black baby, and the number of wives and their behaviour. Also, the bed has been exaggerated in size as well, imagining that a Mormon would need that size of bed. Why do you think this source was made, and what point is it trying to make? Well, it's trying to make the point that Mormons can't be happy and that their lives are inherently immoral. So, if it's meant to be funny, does it make it a worse or less bad form of persecution? Well, I want you to think about a time when someone has said to you something really hurtful, and when they've said, "It's only a joke." How did that make you feel? Did you feel better about it? Possibly, but I think what's more likely is that you didn't feel better about it at all because someone was making fun of you as well as saying something unkind. So actually, often these forms of so-called humorous cartoons are a worse form of persecution because ultimately they're cheapening these beliefs and they're being even more disrespectful through humour and trying to get away with it with sort of the excuse of, oh, it was only a joke, which rarely washes, does it? And yet how often do we hear that said to us ourselves, or do we see it said to other people online? Worth thinking about, isn't it? Okay, we're going to consider where the Mormons were heading now, the Salt Lake Valley. We've got two sources here. We've got one artist's impression of what the Salt Lake Valley looked like when the Mormons arrived. You may feel that certain elements to this source have been kind of tried to altered it away or painted or presented in such a way to make it look more hopeful. Think about the position of the sun in the sky, for example. And source D is a written description of the Salt Lake Valley. Let's have a look at source D now as well and compare it to the first source. A description of the Salt Lake Valley written by one of the first settlers. A broad and barren plain hemmed in by mountains, blistering in the burning rays of the midsummer sun. No waving fields, no swaying forests, no green meadows, but on all sides a seemingly endless waste of sagebrush. The paradise of the lizard, the cricket, and the rattlesnake. Here are some tasks then. Summarise the living conditions in the Salt Lake Valley. Secondly, what made the valley so unsuitable for settlement? And lastly, why might this unsuitability be an advantage for the Mormons? Pause the video while you complete those tasks. Right, well let's have a look. The living conditions of the Salt Lake Valley look really harsh, with little water, little food, and few materials to make any buildings out of. Also, there could be dangerous or unpleasant creatures around, it seems. So what made this valley so unsuitable for settlement? Well, look at the picture. Do you fancy building a house on the side of one of those steep-sounded mountains? No, nor would I. And what are you going to build it out of? There are hardly any trees there. So in terms of fueling fires and building timber houses, you can forget it. But why might that unsuitability make it so suitable for the Mormons? Well, remember, they were determined to set up a life of their own without interference from the people who had been persecuting them. And so choosing somewhere that no one else would want to go would probably ensure that they would basically be left alone. I think it's interesting as well that this painting and this source actually corroborate each other really quite well. That means that they back each other up quite well. Let's look at it line by line. A broad and barren plain hemmed in by the mountains. We can see that in the painting. Blistering in the burning rays of the midsummer sun. We can see that in the painting too. No waving fields or swaying forests or green meadows. Again, that is reflected by the painting. But on all sides, a seemingly endless waste of sagebrush, and sagebrush are the little kind of miniature trees you can see hanging on to the edge of the mountains there, and the paradise of the lizard, the cricket, and the rattlesnake. And we can see the sort of dry, dusty ground that is the habitat of those creatures. It almost makes me wonder if this painting was painted based upon the description in Source D. I've not been able to find out, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. This is going to be your main task, so I'm going to leave it all up at once. You're going to read, research, record, and then hopefully remember. The Mormons not only reached the Salt Lake Valley, they successfully settled there and founded the Salt Lake City. You're going to create a guidebook with the title The Mormon Migration of 1846-47. You can make this as an actual booklet or just create it as a series of mind maps or notes. Whatever you do, you need to include these sections. Who were the Mormons? What did they believe? Who founded the religion? Who led them? And why did they want to move west? The journey to Salt Lake Valley, the route that the Mormons took, how Brigham Young organised the journey and led the Mormons, and the challenges and difficulties that they faced along the way. Then section 3, settling in the Salt Lake Valley. What difficulties were there in the Salt Lake Valley, and how did Brigham Young and the Mormons solve those challenges? So where are you going to get your information? Well, you may have your own revision guide, or you may have a course textbook. Alternatively, there's a link in the description which will link you to the BBC Bitsize website, which has a comprehensive overview of the Mormon migration, including some activities that will help you formulate your answers. So you could use that and still complete this task absolutely fine. So it's up to you to find the correct sources and to spend an appropriate amount of time doing this. But I would suggest that 15 to 20 minutes per section would be the minimum acceptable in order to include sufficient detail. Remember, you will be assessed in the exam on this, and you might be asked to include anything up to 3 or possibly more examples about the Mormon migration. A typical one might be about the Mormon migration as a narrative account, so think about how you could have 3 or 4 different events in sequence and then detail that you could write about each of those 3 or 4 different events. That's the depth that you need to go for. Anyway, enough yakking on from me. You can pause the video now and crack on with your guidebooks to the Mormon migration. Good luck. Pause the video now. So hopefully we've managed to find everything that we needed about the Mormon migration. Let's move on. So we're now going to test our knowledge on the bare essentials. That's bare, not bear. Yep, terrible joke. Anyway, let's move on. Who founded the Mormon faith? Who took over leadership after the death of the founder? When did the Mormon migration start? Give one way the Mormons were better organised than the Donner Party, and if you've not experienced the Donner Party before, do look it up. And then how did strong leadership help ensure success at the Salt Lake Valley? Pause the video while you have a go at answering those questions, and then we'll move on to the answers. Let's have a look at the answers. The Mormon faith was founded by Joseph Smith, but then taken over by Brigham Young after Smith was murdered. The Mormon migration started in 1846, and there were loads of ways that they were better prepared than the Donner Party. Not just by sending an advance party that would confirm the route for them, but also leaving things like vegetable patches and supply drops along the way should anyone get short of food, by having an appropriate and skilled group that was all together, and by travelling at the right time of year. So how did Brigham Young's leadership help ensure success? Well, he organised things like the irrigation systems. He was one strong leader in charge, so the decisions were made quickly. People were given specific jobs to do, so that they were filling the jobs that needed doing rather than just what people wanted to do. Various other reasons too, I'm sure that you've come up with. So that gives us the bare essentials of the Mormon migration. So remember to keep your notes handy. You'll need those for your revision. Do try and reread them and memorise them. And apart from that, that's the end of the lesson. So thanks very much for watching. I hope that this has been useful to you. And if it has, please give this video a like and click on the subscribe button as well. And I'll say thanks very much and goodbye.